So we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to kind of talk to you all and to the adults today. And then Father Andrew's going to say something to you guys at the very end, at the procession, okay? You'll find out. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. So the first part for today that you all are going to remember once we start doing this procession. What's a procession, by the way? Does anyone know? Yeah. That's a great way to put it. It's like an event. How do we do it? That's it. Yeah, we kind of go in a parade, right? That's it. What were you going to say? That's it. Yeah, we kind of follow each other like in a parade to celebrate something. So, I'll give you a little bit of background about why we're doing that. But then we're going to talk a little bit about what we're supposed to do with it. So today is the Sunday of Orthodoxy. And that's because on a February day in the year 842, the Empress Theodora walked into the great church of Constantinople with her son Michael. This is after her husband had just died. And she said, I want the icons restored. We're supposed to go back to having icons in the church. And she saw that some icons that had been lifted up really high so people couldn't venerate them were lowered so people could kiss and adore them. And then some of the activities where they were destroying icons. She said, that's got to stop. No more of that. Now this ended a little over 100 years of a lot of persecution because Christians had been venerating. What does venerating mean? Does anybody know? Respecting. What were you going to say? Showing respect, right? What were you going to say? Yeah, respect, right? Adoring it, right? Christians have been doing this from the very beginning. There's even a tradition that Luke actually did the first icon. There's a tradition of this. We talk about it in our Orthodoxy service, and he made it out of beeswax, and that's what it looked like. It was a gift to the Mother of God. So there's a tradition. This has gone back a really long way. But because of some influences from outside the empire, Christians begin to see that these icons are destroyed. There are some emperors, there are people in charge who are afraid of some of this influence from the outside of the empire, who begin to kind of reread and misunderstand the scriptures, and they say we shouldn't have icons at all, get rid of them. And so Christians have to hold on to these icons. There's a story I think we've told before in this church of a priest by the name of Stephen. And Stephen was a priest, and they made him take an icon he had of Christ, and a bunch of soldiers said, throw it on the ground, and then spit on it and stomp on it. And Stephen said, I'm not going to do that. And Stephen says to these soldiers, what about you on your breastplate that you're wearing? Whose image is that that's on your breastplate? And they said, it's the emperor. And he said, take it off, throw it on the ground, and spit on it and stomp on it. And they kind of knocked him around. They beat him up a little bit. And said, that's not appropriate. We would never do that. Because that image, it goes to honor the emperor. And so we're not going to kick it or step on it or anything like that. And St. Stephen, this priest, says, well, I have an emperor. I have a king. And I don't stomp on or disrespect his image either. So the icons went out. And this is such a big deal that beginning in the year 843, that following year, every year on the first Sunday of Lent, we as Orthodox Christians honor the icons. We remember the victory of icons. And we do that because the icon tells us something. For somebody to have drawn or painted or written an icon of Christ, or to draw, to have known what he looked like, what must they have first been able to do? See Christ. Did people actually see Jesus Christ? Yeah. Did people hear his voice? Yeah. So we as a church, that's right. So we as a church, every time you see these icons out here, it's us proclaiming to the whole world, God is with us. He really became one of us. He walked with us. He took care of us. He healed us. He forgave us. We know him. We knew his voice. He really became one of us. So So this is a big deal in the church. We celebrate this every year on the first Sunday of Lent, that the glory of God is in a living man, and we can see him. But the question might be, and this is also for the adults now, we know this part of the story. So what do we do with that? So Stephen decides to honor this image, right? He's not going to step on it or spit on it. Stephen says, I want to show honor to that image. How does he do that? He kisses it. That's really good. How else? Because with this icon, he's trying to honor God, right? He takes care of it. He kisses it. How else could Stephen, maybe with his body, with his mind, with his hands and his feet, honor God, the image of God? Let's say he's not close enough to kiss it or to touch it. How could he honor God with his body? Just be with him? You speak really well. How else? Pray to him. We can say pray to. How else? What do you think? Oh, that's right. Hey, Michael. How else? Trying to act like him. This is a really good one. How does God act? What does God do? What are some of the things that you would say? Do this. Be kind. What else? Forgive. That's a great one. What are you going to say? Forgive other people and not just yourself. You guys speak really well. The reason I'm pausing is because all the things that you said are right. The way that you can honor this image of Christ is not just by kissing and adoring it and hanging it up in your houses, but you said even if you're so far away that you can't see it or touch it, or maybe you're so far away you can't see it at all, you said you can still honor this image of Christ and this great King of ours by praying, by acting like him, by forgiving people, by loving. If anybody behind you thinks, well, this is too elementary of a sermon. I mean, of course, if I'm going to honor Jesus Christ, I need to pray. I need to do all these things. I would have you all think on the fact that this Sunday, before it was about the icons, was about honoring God with our bodies. That is, there was a guy, the Bishop of Rome, his name was Gregory Theologos. On a March morning in the year 591, he gives a homily. Now remember, this is before the Empress Theodora ever walks into the church with icons. This is before there's iconoclasm. This is before any of that. So what are the Christians doing before 843? I'll tell you. This will be good. On this day in the church, it seems like this was a day when the church used to honor the saints who had gone before God. Moses and Aaron, Abraham, and all these saints who had gone before. It was like a Sunday of the forefathers. It was a day where the church was remembering people who had longed to see God, to experience what we get to experience every day in our lives, but hadn't yet. But nevertheless, they were faithful to God. This first Sunday, the first Sunday of Lent, and it had been the first Sunday of Lent since well after the first council, you guys are doing great, was a day on which it seems that according to Gregory, this Bishop of Rome, the reading was about Christ going into the desert, into the wilderness, to fast for 40 days. Now, does that seem familiar to anybody? That on the first day of Great Lent, Gregory speaks about a gospel reading where Christ goes in to the wilderness to fast for 40 days. What are we doing for the next 40 days? Fasting, right? We're doing Lent. You're right. And he talks about during this period, because I asked you all, well, how do we honor God with our bodies? Not just by hanging up icons, but how do we honor God? This is what Gregory the Great said. He says, during this next 40 days, he said in his homily, a tithe of the year, 10% of the year. He says, during this period, we are going to be praying more. We're going to be fasting. And then he says something interesting. Because as you all said, praying and fasting is really important. Forgiving, these are really important things. But he makes a really good point. He makes a really good point here. He says, and I want to ask you guys a question. Do demons fast? Do demons ever eat anything? Demons fast all the time, don't they? The demons fast, they don't eat anything. Does their fasting make them righteous or holy? No. So a question, is it possible then for a person to just fast and still not be honoring God? Yeah. And if you want proof, on the first day of Lent, one of the very first readings in our church is from Isaiah. And Isaiah says this, it's kind of scary. He's speaking on behalf of God, and you know what he says? I tire and I'm sick of your festivals. The incense that you burn, I don't want to smell it. And the reason being is because Isaiah is speaking to a group of people who seem to be doing the things that we're supposed to. We would say as Christians, we're fasting, we're doing this. But he says there's no heart to it. We appear to be honoring God in the forms of things, but we're not honoring God in our hearts. And Isaiah says to us, we've got to do both. If we're going to fast, we have to fast in our heart. When we go to the services, we have to be present in our hearts. We can't just forgive people with our lips. We've got to do it in our hearts. And Gregor the Great says this too. He says, look, if you're going to fast for the 40 days, you guys are doing great, by the way. I know it's mostly an adult's homily. He says, what good is the fasting if you've said to yourself, I'm going to fast for 40 days so that in 40 days I can take all of that money and all of that appetite and exhaust it on my own stomach. He said, then all you've done is you've just decided to withhold eating until you have a big feast. He says, like Isaiah, he says to do this fast, to prepare ourselves. He says what we're supposed to do is more fasting. And he said, do this above all else. Remember the poor. He said, when you fast, take all the money that you might have used on yourself and find people who are in need. If you're going to fast from, anybody fasting from watching TV or being on their phones? I know some people are, yeah. He said, if you're going to fast from that, take that time, we would say, in modern terms, to call someone who you know needs to be reached out to speak to someone who you know is lonely. In other words, this period of fasting, this period of praying, this period of almsgiving, it needs to be done with love towards others. That's how we need to do this. That's how we honor this fast. That's what the church was remembering on the first Sunday of Great Lent. It was a reminder to the Christians that yes, we're about to fast for 40 days. Yes, we're preparing ourselves. But during that 40 days, don't just let it be a fast from food or fasting from, not watching TV, we might say. He would say to honor this fast, make sure that we're taking our time and really investing it in people who are in need. He said that's what Christians are supposed to do. And Isaiah says this too. He goes, if you're doing this, you're keeping the true religion. You are defending the widow and the orphan, and we're loving God in our hearts. We're not just doing something mechanical. We're not just doing something to fulfill some obligation. We are entering this 40-day period like Moses entered a 40-day period before he had the tablets. Like Isaiah entered a 40-day period. Like Christ entered a 40-day period. To make this tithe of the year something that changes us and is really something that honors God and honors His image, not just by kissing it. We're called to take the next 40 days, and when we're praying, pray for our enemies. When we're fasting, let's take what we would have spent on ourselves and give it to those in need. This is how we honor God. This is how we keep the great fast. And this seems to be what the church was celebrating. Every one of us in this building is a catechumen this season. And I'm glad you asked. Anybody know what a catechumen is? This is how we're going to close. That's right. A catechumen is a person who is about to be baptized. They're in training to be baptized. This 40 days that we're going through right now seems to have been from the beginning a preparation for people who were about to be baptized, which is why on Pascha we're all going to be holding our candles because we're newly baptized. The Lenten season for everyone in this building and for you all here, you're not too young to hear this, and for the priests and the altar and everyone else, all of us are called again to re-enter our catechism, to be trained according to the tradition, to take up the fasting, not just to starve ourselves, because not eating is just starving ourselves, but to consume God through prayer and presence in the divine services, to give to those in need, to be a light to the world. In that way, we're not just honoring these icons here, but we are becoming living icons that other people get to experience God. Thank you all for being so attentive this morning. And you guys are going to see here in a little bit, at the very end of this service, we're going to do a procession around this whole church, holding up our icons as proof that God is with us, that we have been called to honor Him with these images and words and writings, but also not to forget on this day that we are also called to be icons, to help save the whole world in love. To God be the glory.